Hey everybody, we had technical difficulty there, so starting a little bit late today. But this is the oh my God, it's doing it again. Okay, well I'm going to assume it's going to keep going. So this is the Pro and the Con show, and I'm your host, Michael James Ott, and I'm not quite sure what's going on with Facebook and Google today, but we're going to go on anyway, assuming that it's working. So the purpose of this program is I spend 15 or 20 minutes and I talk about how we're going to do a better job about listening to each other and understanding the truth about the various issues, pro and con, good and bad, for and against. And I personally am very happy if people form their opinions about what we should do next with various topics, but I want it to be an informed decision, and that means that you have to be open and take in, both sides of the different issues here. And one of the problems that we have, and one of the things that's going on in this country, is people are just steadfastly refusing to even acknowledge the other side of the issues as we talk about them as a nation, and that just doesn't make any sense. In past programs I've talked about or used the analogy of a used car and the difference in how you perceive the value of that used car if you then understand later that it has a bad transmission in it. Well, you want to know that transmission is bad. The pro and the con of buying the car includes the con of having a bad transmission. And, that's part of the equation, if you will. So normally what I try to do here is, and I'll go ahead and show this on the screen, I've selected 5 websites that a lot of people get their news from, and we go literally from left to right, from liberal to conservative. So on the left we have the Huffington Post and CNN, and then NPR, National Public Radio, is kind of in the center, slightly less or mostly unbiased, generally people feel. And then Fox News on the right, and then Breitbart News beyond that as well. And so just going through, this is again May 4th, going through, Huffington Post has this, their main thing is the Wells Fargo. They have a big thing with the fraud thing, and then the next thing on their front page is Trump with a Twitter rampage. He's upset with Facebook because of they've taken away the rights of some of the far right extremists, like this Alex Jones. And I talked about that in a previous show. And they also bring up the fact that former Chief of Staff General Kelly now has a job with an immigrant detention company. And there's an article about that. And then going to CNN, they're now saying there's an article that says that California and Illinois and a handful of other states are going to try to force presidential candidates to submit the last 5 years of their tax forms before they're allowed to be placed on the ballot. So that's an interesting play where some of the states are trying to force, and of course the main person that refuses to show his taxes is, of course, Donald Trump. National Public Radio, they have William Barr, and this fact that he's refusing to testify in front of the House of Representatives, and the ongoing thing about that, which I've talked about over the last couple of days. On Fox, their main thing is Stacey Abrams in the front, talking about how she won the election and it was stolen from her, and a little bit of stuff about the Kentucky Derby. And then Breitbart has this, and we talked about this yesterday a little bit more of this Hunter Biden thing with some of this percolating what is going on with This is not working. What the heck? Well, I hate it when technology doesn't work, so we're going to keep going. It may not show up on Facebook, but we'll still have it on YouTube. So this story about Hunter Biden, and there's some things going on in China and in the Ukraine, and some discussion about whether that's going to have kind of some scandal associated with it. But what I would like to do, and I've already wasted several minutes here trying to get the websites to work and stuff like that, is just say a few words off topic here. There's nothing, well, I'm sure there's something in the news on this, but I want to really just talk about racism and oppression. And the first thing I want to say is that this is a conversation that we have to have an open conversation about this. And I'm not talking about yelling and screaming at each other. In fact, I would strongly hope that we could do just the opposite, that we could have some fairly calm but very open discussion about racism and sexism and other forms of bias against others for whatever reason, oppression, basically, oppression and bias. And so we really, as humans, I have a theory, and that theory is that, as we're growing up, we grow up among people kind of in a family unit, most of us anyway, and those people in the family look a lot like us, and they're nurturing toward us, and we learn to trust them. And in our history, the human history, I think, if you got outside the family, if you lost that, if you ended up getting lost and end up with some other group, it was fairly common for you to not be treated well. Things were hard and times were tough back then. People really literally spent every day, just trying to survive, and so to take on, members that weren't part of your group, weren't part of your family, this almost certainly was not done on a regular basis. And the whole point being that we have come from a place in our history where we have a tendency to try to trust other people that kind of look and behave like us. But the reality is, this is a global reality these days. And, very quickly, as you're entering adulthood and for your entire adult life, you very much are outside of that family area and are dealing with everyone else. And, the bottom line is that they had the same experiences, only in their family units, and now they have to interact with you. And we have to consciously, this is a conscious thing, we have to ask ourselves continuously, you're dealing with some person, and you need to consciously ask yourself, would I be dealing with them? Would I be behaving differently with them if they were me, or if they were a close member of my family? And if the answer is yes, then you have to stop and say, wait a second, I can't do that. And the reason for that is that bias and oppression, which is the adjacent issues with racism, they come from it's just a numbers game. So if you happen to have 10 people of a certain group and only one of another, and then that 10, regardless of whether white or black or Hispanic or Chinese or whatever, whatever, they can, because of the numbers, right? they almost certainly can overcome the individual that isn't one of that group. And so they can oppress and enslave and horribly treat that person. But the reality is that could just as easily be reversed. And the truth is that, as you go through your life, day to day and year to year, you're going to end up in that situation. You're going to go from where you're in maybe a significant majority to a significant minority. And the expectation has to be at all times that you're going to treat each other fairly. This has to be the norm. And we just can't allow ourselves to follow these more baser instincts that sometimes come into play. And the other part of it is I do want to try to say something about, because some of us have been in a minority much more than a majority, just on the aggregate, they have suffered a lot more bias and oppression. That's simply a fact. I mean, the probability that I'm a white American of generally European descent, the probability that if you go back into my family tree somewhere and there's someone that's been lynched in a tree, not very high. It's just not very high. And on the other hand, though, because of the racism and the hate and the oppression from decades and decades, if I'm an African American sitting here in this chair, it's very likely that someone, there's a good chance that someone, a distant cousin, a distant, a great uncle or something, some person was actually lynched. I mean, this is the kind of level of horror that the minorities have experienced up to this point. So those that have of us that have been fortunate enough to be in the majority most of this time, I can't say that I can absolutely fully understand what people in the minority have been feeling, but I certainly can try, and we certainly have to try, and we have to make good on this future where we're no longer going to allow that to occur. And we have to be understanding that there's going to be angst and anger over the past, and we have to work through that and be open to discussing it and trying to assuage it through very open, frank, fair, calm, compassionate discussion. Well, anyway, this is the pro and con show, and again, pro and con, for and against, good and bad, and certainly is my hope that anyone watching this will take some moments, regardless of your history, and try to open your minds and your hearts to the idea that we have to be conscious about treating each other fairly, regardless of appearance or other traits that should not make a difference, right? And so I welcome you to do that. If you want to, in this video or future videos, please leave comments. I'd be happy to make responses to questions or comments. And, as the video rolls, if you're watching from some other location, I'm here in Hudson, Wisconsin. If you're in Seattle or New York or Toronto or Beijing or wherever, type in I'm watching from Beijing, and thank you for watching. Again, this has been the Pro and Con Show with your host, Michael James Ott. Bye for now.